So it's official. Nvidia has announced their $500 4060 Ti. Yes, $500. Now, they announced 3 different GPUs. Maybe a YouTuber who is beholden to Nvidia, they may start by saying they've announced a $399 4060 Ti. That would look a lot better in marketing, right? But if we really break down what's happening here, and some other people may not be able to because they're going to have ties to perhaps Nvidia, even if it's not necessarily directly, if they say the wrong thing, remember what happened to Hardware Unboxed when they went against Nvidia? They weren't sampled any GPUs. Well, guess what? The truth needs to be out there, and a 4060 Ti for $500, no matter if it has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, is still way too much. The first problem, the 4060 Ti does have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Sure, that's definitely very welcomed. We want more VRAM, and that's kind of Nvidia admitting they've made a mistake and they know people are really mad at low VRAM GPUs. That's why they're offering a 16 gigabyte version. But did you notice how they staggered the launch? We're going to get the 8 gigabyte version first at $399 because Nvidia knows if they launch the 16 gigabyte version first, everybody that will buy that GPU, and I don't think you should, will buy the one with higher VRAM, and the cheaper one will not sell really at all. Here's one huge point. Per Nvidia's own slides and their numbers, the 4060 Ti, the 8GB model, has at best maybe 15 to 20% better performance than the predecessor, the 3060 Ti. That's not really all that great. And in fact, I have a 3060 Ti right here. This guy has 8GB of VRAM. 3 years ago, it launched at $399. So now we're getting basically only 15% better performance, the same amount of VRAM. To be fair, the new VRAM specifications, the bad part, it's going to be a lot less of the memory bandwidth. The new GPU only has 128-bit memory bus, while this guy had 256 bits. To be fair, the newer GPU does have more L2 cache, so let's say the bandwidth theoretically isn't as bad as it may seem in practice, but still, who knows if it's going to make a difference or not. It's something that is hard to test. Not many people test it. I've done it before on the 4070 Ti, where I showed that the VRAM 192-bit bus on that guy was a big limiting factor when you have high textures and ray tracing, all things that Nvidia certainly pushes. So the problem is 15% to 20% better performance than this guy. But then if we look at the 4060 Ti 16GB model, if we ignore the fact that it has twice the amount of VRAM, that GPU's rasterization performance isn't really going to be any better than the 8GB model. Sure, the 16GB of VRAM will give you a performance boost in many games that will require more VRAM. You're going to be able to do generally higher settings, but overall, there's no other, hardware specification to that GPU that's going to give you much better, performance. So in theory, it's going to be pretty close to that 15 to 20% performance improvement over this guy. And then we're looking at $100 price increase just to have the 16GB model. I think that's why Nvidia is launching that one in July instead of, in May or earlier, like they're going to do with the 8GB model. While yes, in theory, it's nice you're getting 16 gigabytes of VRAM, if we look at the pricing, and that's what we specialize here on the channel, looking at the real world pricing and what people think is a fair value, not what Nvidia thinks. They can price it at whatever they want and people won't buy it. Case in point, look at all the 4070s sitting on store shelves right now. And guess what? It's not just a bad economy. It's because that GPU is way too high for the specs that you get. Even in a good economy, people would still not buy it. Of course, more people would, but people would still know that it's not a good value. Effectively, what's happening here, Nvidia is switching around the product stack. There's a lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes that they can use to massage their message, if you will, so it doesn't seem as bad. Like if they call it a 16GB 4060 Ti, on paper, they can justify it at $499. But really, if we call this GPU what it is, it's likely supposed to be a 4060 or something like that, it should be a lot cheaper. Remember, the 4070 specs and the specs of the VRAM that we're looking at here indicate they should be a lower class GPU than they currently are. Nvidia has tried this before, of course, with the 4080 12GB, which then became the 4070 Ti, which really probably should have been a 4070, and then the product stack would have gone down from there. You would have seen the 4070 as the real 4060 Ti at $499, and then this 16GB version would have been perhaps the $399. I believe that's the price that it should be, considering its performance and considering that 8GB of VRAM is really unacceptable even in the $300 price mark. That's why even the $300 4060 with only 8GB of VRAM is still not a very good deal. I mean, you can get $300 8GB GPUs now basically everywhere. You have the 6600 XT, you have Nvidia's own 3060 Ti that now is, around that price or a little bit less. So there are a lot of market options right now. And for Nvidia to continue to release these as higher class GPUs when they really aren't, that just justifies their pricing for them, but it doesn't for the gamer. Maybe something like the 4060 should be a 4050 in the $200 range. The 4060 Ti 8GB should be probably $299, and that should be the real 4060. And then the 16GB version should be $399. I think at that price, people would accept a 16GB GPU. If you think it's crazy to ask for a 16GB GPU at that price range, look at Intel's Arc GPU. That GPU is going to be under $400. It usually is around $330 to $350 for the 16GB model. So if Intel can do it, why can't Nvidia do it? Because they're trying on the sort of like micro scale to keep the GPU specs as limited as they can get away with, while selling you the GPU for as high a price as they can get away with, because that not only has benefits for them now, so they can push all of their other technologies and they don't have to spend as much per product, but in the future, it means as they release path tracing and different things like that they're pushing higher textures in games, you're going to be forced to buy a much more expensive newer GPU when they're like, okay, here you go, here's a 16GB, 5070 or something like that in the future, and then they're going to justify the price increase because today's 4070 and today's 4060 Ti GPUs will seem like bad deals compared to what they can present in the future with more VRAM as the gaming environment opens up, and we see that VRAM really is very important, as we've seen with the last several releases of games that have come out, as well as going forward in the future. There's another really big problem at $499. Remember when the RTX 4070 got that $100 Steam gift card from Micro Center? While it didn't make it a $499 GPU, for some people it kind of did in a way. At least it got closer, because a lot of people will buy that GPU and they're also going to want to buy Steam games. There's a lot of games coming out that you can put that credit towards, and even doing that, the GPU didn't fly off the shelves. People weren't extremely excited at buying that GPU. I would prefer a 12GB 4070 at $499 rather than a 16GB 4060 Ti at $499, because the 4070 is just going to have much more superior performance overall. As per the performance numbers that we're seeing now, it seems like the 4060 Ti is going to really fall right around the performance of the RTX 3070. Honestly, I don't really think that's enough over a generation to go up and, you're basically staying around the same place and not really going very far if you really put everything down, even if you're going down $100 from where the 3070 was. If you're talking about the 8GB 4060 Ti, it really isn't enough of a difference. Look at the 4090, for example. That's the only GPU that, even though it's a really high price, Nvidia actually got right in terms of the performance that's expected. It's basically twice the performance of an RTX 3090, maintaining, the same power, and the price didn't really go up all that much. It went up about $100. So that was the initial metric for RTX 4000, and at that point, they looked pretty good. The market wasn't nearly as bad when that first came out. People knew it's expensive, but the performance was pretty impressive. But as soon as we saw the 4080 and every GPU after, the price to performance just seemingly didn't make any sense versus last last generation. And then, of course, we started dealing with the very limited hardware specifications that Nvidia started throwing at us, like the 4070 Ti and the 4070. And now it continues. And then we do have a little twist with a 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti, which is Nvidia's way of appeasing gamers and at least putting up some face competition against AMD, who is likely to have many more 16 and 12 gigabyte GPUs around this price class. But still, I don't think it's enough because the GPU at its face value doesn't perform, even with 16 gigabytes of VRAM, enough to justify $500. It should be $100 cheaper. And judging from all of the performance that we've seen so far and how the market is reacting to the 4070, I think that's a pretty accurate assumption. And it's pretty accurate to assume that this GPU likely won't sell very well at all, because gamers are still going to find it really a slap in the face compared to what we should be getting for the price that you're spending. But while we don't know as much about the 4060 at $299, that one we still have to see how the performance will pan out compared to other GPUs available. The middle GPU, the 8 gigabyte 4060 Ti at $399, I think looks the worst out of the three, because that's way too expensive for 8 gigabytes. If you're going to get a 4060 Ti, it looks like a 16 gigabyte version. Maybe, who knows, maybe that's the one that Nvidia really wants people to buy. A 4060 Ti with 16 gigabytes does make a lot more sense, but then you look at the price at $499 and that kind of resets everything again to being unreasonable. So it really just ends up falling back at zero, like I don't recommend. It may be better. I mean, look, $499 can get you a 6800, which also has 16 gigabytes of VRAM from AMD, and it's going to have a lot better performance than a 4060 Ti. A 6800 often beats a 3070 by a pretty decent margin, and while it is AMD, and I understand some people don't want AMD GPUs because of, various issues, I don't blame you completely, but if you can get it in that $400 range, it may be a much better deal. Then of course you have to worry about the wattage. It's going to be better on the 4060 Ti, and then DLSS 3 as well as Nvidia specific technologies. If that's something that you like, then the 4060 Ti will have that as opposed to AMD. So far at $500, 4060 Ti is not very impressive, but you guys need to, just pay attention and watch out for all of these marketing tricks, because Nvidia is throwing a lot out there. They're moving around all of these product stacks. At the end of the day, we're still not getting a good deal, even if to some people on the surface it may appear like good news, like, oh, finally 16 gigabytes of VRAM. It really isn't, and we don't know what the street pricing will be like. If there's going to be, the AIB models, how much more they're going to be. If Nvidia will keep the price close to MSRP, just like with the 4070 they had to, because even at that price people weren't buying. So there's a lot that remains to be seen. So remember to subscribe for more updates on these GPUs as we learn exactly what's going on. But from the offset, it looks like they're just way too expensive, and it's not enough to appease gamers in this market. Nvidia really needs to try a little bit harder if they want to sort of win back the mind share that they're really losing very rapidly to gamers everywhere because of their pricing and the hardware that they're offering. All right, guys, so remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.